Hey guys, welcome back to Vital Signs. Today we're talking about tissues. If you're new here, I'm Professor Thomas. I'm here to give you a crash course on all things anatomy and physiology. We have four major types of tissues in the body: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Let's start with epithelial. Epithelial tissue is going to line body cavities and form ducts and tubes. These cells are strongly connected, they're really packed together, and they do not have blood vessels. We classify epithelial tissue cells by their shapes and the number of layers that are present. So if we have an epithelial tissue cell that is really squished down and flat, we would call that squamous or squamous. People pronounce it differently depending on who they learned from. If it's cube-shaped, we would call it cuboidal. If it's column-shaped, columnar. So those are our three main shapes. As far as layers go, if we only have one layer, it is simple. If we have multiple layers, so basically any more than two, that would be stratified. We'll also talk about transitional, which changes shape. On top of knowing the names for the shapes and the names for the numbers of layers, you also want to know examples for each of these. So starting with simple squamous. Simple, one layer, squamous, flat and scale-like. We'll find this type of epithelial tissue in the alveoli of the lungs. And it makes sense if you think about what's happening there. In the alveoli of the lungs, we are exchanging oxygen for carbon dioxide. And to get those gases to pass through, we need a very thin single layer of cells, simple squamous. Stratified squamous epithelium is a different story. Stratified means we've got multiple layers. Squamous is still flat and scale-like. This is what makes up our skin. We'll find stratified squamous epithelium anywhere that there's a lot of friction in the body. So, and when I say friction, I'm not talking rubbing really hard. Even the friction of wearing your clothes could count as friction. So we've got multiple layers of these scale-like cells. If we lose a layer, it's not the end of the world. We can replace that with new layers coming up from the basement membrane. So we'd find that on the skin, you could find it in the mouth, in the nostrils, in the vagina, anywhere there is friction potentially on the body, we'll have this tissue type. Simple cuboidal, simple being one layer, cuboidal being cube-shaped, we'll find anywhere in the body where there is some sort of secretion happening. Whether those secretions are coming out of ducts, into tubules on the body surface, that's where we would find simple cuboidal. Stratified cuboidal, on the other hand, will be found in glands, so like sweat glands or salivary glands. Simple columnar, simple is one layer, columnar is column shape. We would find lining the intestines. Specifically, if we look at simple columnar cells lining the intestines, we'll find these white-looking masses between the cells. Those are called goblet cells. And goblet cells are there to produce mucus. The purpose of simple columnar is to aid with absorption. So it makes sense that we'd find that in the intestines. Let's talk about pseudostratified epithelial tissue now. Pseudostratified is a weird thing. It's one layer and they all touch the basement membrane in some way, but to varying degrees. So we might have one cell that has a big portion of it touching the basement membrane, and the cell right next to it only has a tiny piece touching the basement membrane. So pseudostratified just refers to the fact that they're all touching that basement membrane to a varying degree. An example of where we would find this would be the trachea. Transitional epithelium is going to be cuboidal or squamous. It all depends on stretch. So let's talk about the urinary bladder. When the bladder is empty, the cells surrounding it look cube-like in shape. But when the bladder fills up, those cubes get squished into more of a scale-like shape, so squamous. That's what we mean when we say transitional. Another area of the body where we have this kind of stretch would be the uterus during pregnancy. So those are transitional cells as well. That's it for epithelial. Moving on to connective tissue. This is the category of tissue you're going to spend the most time on. It is the most diverse. It has the most information. So looking at our types of connective tissue, we have fibrous, bone, cartilage, blood, and hematopoietic tissue. Let's start with fibrous. We've got a lot of different types of fibrous connective tissue. So we could have loose fibrous connective tissue, sometimes called areolar tissue. This is the fascia or the glue that kind of holds organs together. It has collagenous fibers. It has elastic fibers. There's a lot going on here, but think of this areolar tissue as glue. Another type of fibrous connective tissue would be adipose tissue. When you hear adipose, think fat. Fat is either going to be brown or white. And I'm not talking about the actual color of fat, because if you open up a body, fat actually looks kind of yellow. White and brown fat are different categories of fat. They don't refer to the actual color of the fat. White fat is there to store triglycerides. This is where we are storing things for later use, energy for later use. Brown fat is there to produce heat. Reticular fibrous connective tissue is delicate. It is this network of collagen fibers. Dense fibrous connective tissue is strong bundles of collagen, and how we organize that collagen will change how we name this tissue type. So if the collagen are in parallel lines like we would see in a tendon, this would be called regular. If the collagen is in swirls, not parallel lines, we would call this irregular. Irregular we would find in the deeper layers of the skin. Bone is this collagenous matrix with calcium deposits within it. We have two different types of bone, compact or spongy. Spongy is also known as cancellous. Let's start by talking about compact. Compact bone is made of cylindrical osteons or Haversian systems, and we'll find compact bone on the outer walls of bone. Spongy bone looks like what the name suggests. It looks like a sponge. We have these crisscrossing beams of bone. It's not one solid mass. That's why we call it spongy or cancellous. With cartilage tissue, this has the consistency of a gristle-like gel. There are three types you want to be familiar with: hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Hyaline cartilage has a moderate amount of collagen. It forms a flexible gel. Fibrocartilage is dense with collagen. It's not flexible at all. Elastic cartilage has some collagen and some elastin, which gives it some flexibility, but also the ability to go back to its original shape and size. For blood tissue, you want to be familiar with red blood cells or erythrocytes, white blood cells or leukocytes, and platelets or thrombocytes. Those are our three components of blood. Hematopoietic tissue, on the other hand, is a type of blood-forming tissue. That is it for connective tissue. That was a lot. Muscle tissue is split into three categories. We've got three different types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. I only want you to know two things about each type of muscle tissue. Is it voluntary or involuntary? Is it striated or visceral? Let's start with skeletal muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is voluntary. When you think of muscle tissue, this is what you're thinking of. The muscles that make up the majority of your body. This is skeletal. I can consciously think and make a decision and move those muscles. And I can raise my hand in class. That is a voluntary movement. If I were to take some of that muscle and look at it on a microscope slide, I would see little lines breaking up the cell. Those are called striations. So it is voluntary and striated. Cardiac muscle tissue, I can't control how fast my heart is beating, so that's involuntary. If I look at that on a microscope slide, we have these lines breaking them up, so it is striated, but we'll notice extra lines in here that look a little different. Those are called intercalated discs. And in cardiac muscle tissue, those intercalated discs help the electricity of the heart to move quickly and efficiently so the heart can pump effectively. Smooth muscle tissue lines your hollow organs, so think blood vessels and your whole digestive tract. This is involuntary. I cannot control how fast I'm digesting my food. If we look at it on a microscope slide, as the name suggests, it is smooth. There are no striations. When there are no striations, we would call that visceral. Wrapping things up with nervous tissue, the function or purpose of nervous tissue is communication. We're sending electrical signals from one area of the body to another area of the body. The main cell here is the neuron, and there are three parts of the neuron you want to be familiar with. There are dendrites, a cell body, and a single axon. Dendrites are sending information into the neuron. Directions are important here. So dendrites send that electrical signal to the neuron, to the cell body. In the cell body, we condense and organize that information and send it away through the axon. How we remember this is axons away, okay? That's the direction that the signal is going. Also, we have glial cells, which function as support cells to the nervous cells. What do we do when these tissues get injured or hurt in some way? Well, it depends on which tissue we're talking about. Epithelial and connective tissue have the greatest capacity for repair. Nervous and muscle tissue, not so much. They can regenerate under favorable conditions, but it is more likely to see repairs made in epithelial and connective tissue. When we have an injury to a tissue and that tissue repairs itself, usually it'll leave a scar, which is a dense fibrous mass. If that scar is unusually thick, we would classify that as a keloid, which you might have had one of those if you got an ear piercing and a bump grew on it, usually in a more cartilaginous area like the top of the ear or even the nose. Keloids are prone to develop in those areas. And there you have it. Those are our tissues. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.